Freelancer. Yeah, better start doing that. Okay, let's get something out of the way first. Hitman 3's Freelancer Mode is something the game sorely needed, a shot in the arm to renew interest from players who aren't necessarily keen on caring about the one rating to rule them all, Silent Assassin. This single metric has been the reason why Hitman plays so well. Sure, when you start out you don't care about ratings or stealth, but the more you play Hitman, the more the puzzle intrigues you, and the more you want to solve it in the best way possible. It's like an itch needing to be scratched, but by the same token, having one metric, playstyle, what have you, limits the meta and gameplay in a lot of ways, making explosives largely impossible to use without deep knowledge of the game's mechanics, or weapons that just supersede it for one reason or another. Enter Freelancer Mode. This roguelike game mode really does change the perception of a regular Hitman player from what will get me Silent Assassin to what will get the job done. And that actually makes playstyles worthy of their name, instead of being a consolation prize to make you feel slightly less bad at ruining a perfect run. I'm not saying that the base game is boring, far from it, but there's a lot Freelancer does better than the base game currently, and having no Silent Assassin baked into the levels, no preset puzzle, kind of, it all makes you think on your toes. The time I've spent in Freelancer is not something I entirely regret, but I'm at level 67 now, and I found it more repetitive than the base game, and that is not a good thing to say about a game series based around repetitive actions and expected outcomes. Maybe I'm just having awesomeness withdrawal, I'm sure that plays a part. Maybe I'm just burnt out, which is also probable given how much I've played since January, but I don't think that explains all of my negative feelings towards Freelancer right now. Back in March, I managed to figure out the 4 main key flaws and why it feels more and more like I'm just going through the motions rather than enjoying my time in the game, and here they all are. The Merces economy sucks right now. This flaw is very all-encompassing. The TLDW, for those who skipped timestamps, is that you either have too many Mercies to know what to do with, or have so little that it actively hampers gameplay. Every Syndicate hit tops out around 6,000 or 8,000 Mercies, and that's assuming you do all the objectives. And while there are maps where Mercies can be found, such as in safes and couriers, it's even a random drop in a supply crate, they're all treated like a small boost to your wallet, rather than a proportionate reward for finding the Mercies to begin with. And they're not on all contracts that you can take, with the notable exception of New York's Vault, which can pay out up to 13,000 Mercies if you know what you're doing. You may as well ignore the rest of these hidden Mercies caches unless you really need them, and because you earn so little, the weapons that you can buy from a supplier can be prohibitively expensive in the early game, on top of being randomized already. On the other side of the spectrum, if you're on a roll and have 150,000 Mercies or more, you can buy whatever you want from suppliers, and even cover the cost of a campaign loss in many cases. That's a massive shift in perspectives, isn't it? You're either a Mercies kingpin at the top of your game, able to afford everything, or you're scrounging for coins across the map in supply crates or hidden stashes and the like just to afford the items you need to complete the objectives. See what I mean? The economy is slanted very heavily to favour the wealthy, and very much punishing those who are either not good at the game, get screwed over by objective RNG, or those just starting out, either after failing one too many times or just when they first boot the mode up, where only the ones with the game knowledge actively benefit. That and those who abuse Alt F4, don't lie, you've all done it. And to some extent, that's fine. The more money you have, then that usually means the player is skilled at the game, and that should be rewarded. However, the balance between affordable and expensive, as it should be clear by now, is so out of whack that it affects other aspects of the game. This is an issue that seeds itself in other parts of the mode. Currently, IO Interactive's solution to the problem, as enacted back in the May patch of 2023, is to implement a prestige system, better known as a respec system by everyone else, for those whose you play Payday 2 or really any game from the early 2010s, you'll know what this is about. At its core, you remove some kind of progression the player has gained, but in return, you get more base XP, money, or some other kind of resources that are boosted permanently by a small percent. In Hitman 3's case, when you activate a prestige level, you lose all of your weapons, all of your freelancer tools, and all mercies you were carrying. That sounds like a pretty decent solution, but it does kind of perverse the original intentions of the mode, no? Essentially, your goal goes from trying to survive and buying what you can, to earning enough mercies and blitzing through missions in an attempt to repossess the weapons taken from you. Sure, you, the player, have a blank slate now, which solves the problem of the economy in a sense, but I'd argue a hard reset isn't a solution to one's economy issues. Actual balancing of the economy is. And also, you only have 5 prestige levels, meaning you can only do this 5 times, so the problem will still exist. For the record, and despite what I just said, I don't really mind the prestige system by itself. I think the game can benefit from it. I just don't find it necessary to add right now, especially as it feels more like a temporary fix for the eco issues rather than a permanent solution. There are other issues to work on. Speaking of which, this brings me quite nicely to flaw number 2. Failure is too punishing. Roguelikes, and roguelites for that matter, differentiate themselves from other games by punishing the player heavily, but fairly, when it comes to making mistakes or otherwise failing a run or level or whatever. However, those developers are also aware that not every person will either find it fun to lose all the time, or just don't have the time to play along as the developers originally intended them to. Hades' God Mode and Windbound's fairly good difficulty settings are a great example of spreading out the difficulty curve to suit more player preferences, and it makes the game more accessible to more people with less punishing conditions for failing. Now, Freelancer does have an alternate difficulty, Hardcore Mode, but from all the player accounts I can find online, it being a fair difficulty increase is not something people have been saying, let's put it that way. But I am not touching it with a 10-foot pole as it is right now. That's its own video. So, with all this in mind, when you fail a campaign, what does this mode do to punish you? Well, you lose half your mercies in your wallet, you lose everything you are carrying, and you lose all of your freelancer tools, including the ones at the safe house. That last part is a design choice, and a controversial one at that, and I'm not the only one to notice this feeling a tad bit unfair as punishments go. This caused enough ruckus that the developers put up a blog post on their horribly formatted website, seriously change it back, about their motivations for doing this. Their reasoning can be summarised as failure and punishment is expected in roguelikes and roguelites, and while it breaks immersion, it feels like a fitting punishment for us for the expected in the genre. Nah, we're not going to change it. Okay, those weren't their exact words, but you get the idea. And while it's not really wrong, I can't fault a lot of their wording, there are fans who are satisfied with this answer. I disagree. I really dislike their attitude here, as it comes off as standoffish and unwilling to change their design to player feedback that they wanted during the CTT. Sticking to your guns doesn't always work, guys. Making concessions with your user base, the people you are trying to please, is not failure. It's not you were wrong. It's agreement on both sides of the developer-player relationship that change is needed. Removing freelancer tools you were carrying is fairly reasonable. I don't actually mind that as a punishment. It didn't break my immersion as it was being carried on 47's person, very much like the other weapons 47 was carrying. But as I said during the CTT, did 47 get robbed or something? Outright admitting to breaking immersion in your blog post by removing tools in a place called a safe house is a very good way to bring me out of the gameplay. Not only that, but this decision has other consequences. It slows the gameplay of Freelancer down considerably, as it takes longer to really get into the groove of a run. To some extent, that's fine when you first play the mode, as you have to learn the other aspects of the game too. But after your first campaign or two, the player is going to be at least aware of the mechanics and some of the best ways days to play the game. That's at least 16 to 24 hours at best into playing the mode, depending on how you want to count it. By doing this, when the player is either aware of the game mode's quirks or is well established with the concept, it comes off as an unfitting punishment just there to punish you. It demotivates people from starting a new run, as it's harder to start over without these tools, and that makes people want to play your game less. Yes, you have more weapons on your wall, but those don't always help with objectives, and that too is controlled by RNG from suppliers and supply crates. I think the most blatant admittance of we're doing this for strictly gameplay purposes is the addition of the collector edition variants of some of these freelancer tools. The advantage being that they persist across campaigns, but they are very expensive, which means that newbies can't afford them, nor can people who fail a lot. Because of the Merces economy, they are too expensive and only benefit those who can reliably afford them, the ones with the most cash. I swear this is not a political commentary. I've seen some defense for these weapons, people arguing that these act like an in case of fire, break glass situation. My counter to that is that you shouldn't have that differentiation to begin with. Mitigating a failure condition, while not inherently a problem, can defeat the original purpose of that failure condition if it's literally just the same thing, but slightly modified to benefit the player. I just don't see the point. And I see collector edition freelancer tools as a band-aid to the solution of freelancer being too punishing, and not an alternative to the guns they replace for when you fail. XP getting increasingly harder to earn the more you play. This is the reason why I stopped playing Freelancer. Around level 30 or so, the XP gain for Safe House Mastery becomes increasingly harder to get, as in, the XP needed to gain another mastery level gets harder and harder per level. It's not noticeable at first, but at level 46 to 50, you start to feel like you're standing in one place while the end goal gets further away. I'm on level 67, take a wild guess on how good that feels to play against. Hell, consider how hard it is for those who are much higher level than I am. This is the sort of thing I was talking about when it comes to fighting against the game, a concept I mentioned back in the CTT feedback video. If the player is fighting against the game, not synergizing with it, then something about your game is problematic. This, right now, is a problem, and it makes playing Freelancer, well, boring and demotivating. It feels like I'm not being rewarded properly, and it feels like I'm pulling on a sack of rocks that keeps getting heavier and heavier to pull. Making things worse is that a more subtle problem also exists when it comes to XP calculation. It still thinks about Silent Assassin in mind, and well, stealth in general, is still greatly rewarded over loud gameplay, which is kind of odd logic to go off of for a game mode that is apparently trying to get people to play in ways the main game would actually punish and mark you down for. It seems rather strange that the game doesn't really reward all that much XP when you go loud. The moment you do so, your XP gets cut by at least 40%, possibly more, depending on what else you do. It's like the algorithm for XP generation is having an identity crisis. While I am in agreement that names should mean things, this is a stealth-based game after all, I would expect more of an XP gain for going loud and trying different approaches compared to the base game, instead of continuing to punish the playstyle. It's yet more reason to always keep quiet and everyone keeping to their complacent playstyles, rather than encouraging new ones. It's really weird is where I'm getting at. Hell, there are battle passes with a better grind than Freelancer right now, and those are a mechanic that is deliberately grindy to get money out of the player by making them impatient, rather than solely being a test of skill. And even battle passes learned not to do what Hitman is currently doing, as it discourages play and makes people leave. The precise opposite of what you want in a free-to-play game. So the XP gain in, say, Paladins is static between each level, not dynamic as it is here. All this is to say that slowing people down in this way only really serves to pad the game time out, and not much else. Currently, and in my opinion, it does not feel rewarding to level up after a certain point. Too much going on, too little variation, too much time spent. I mentioned this during the CTT, and something that IY seems to have dismissed as not a concern, but each map has too much going on. The couriers, the safes, the identification of targets and showdowns, while the levels offer too little in those variations of couriers and potential targets to, well, feel unique each time. I said this back in November, but there is surprisingly less RNG than IY leads you to believe, and having any one of these mechanics is fine, but it becomes increasingly suffocating, and in many respects can cancels each other out. IOI have even noticed this, admitting that players in the CTT just didn't go for side objectives during showdowns. They didn't say why this was the case, but it's pretty clear that players found it too risky and time-consuming to do these things. IOI's only solution was to lower the suspects in showdowns and make those contracts worth more, which is not a bad solution by itself, but that doesn't really solve the other mechanics coming off as extraneous to the mode, rather than a necessary part of it. It contributes to the game mode feeling slow, made worse by, say it with me now, the Merces economy, which actively forces players to explore the map so they can find currency and attempt to buy things they need, which sounds like a good thing until you realise how long it takes to do all this. 3 missions can balloon into 2 hours very easily, and that is a hell of a flaw and one massive time investment for the player. I've seen suggestions on the forum for IOI to enable some kind of quick save feature to alleviate this issue, but alleviate does not solve. Like with the collector edition freelancer tools, that just feels like a band-aid, not a permanent solution to the issue. Don't get me wrong, the game should absolutely have a quick save feature within freelancer. People lead busy lives. I don't think couriers serve their purpose, even if the Mercies count was increased if you KO them. I still feel that it would be better to focus on the main mission rather than track them down and get some more coinage. Mercies should just be a reward for contracts and in hidden stashes, so as to continue to reward exploration while not padding the game with tasks for the player to try their hand at. Being optional does not excuse it from contributing to a game mode's design flaws. As a final note, while I do like you being open about the changes to the game, I would take my criticisms to heart, IO Interactive, much like you did during the CTT. I feel like pushing back against criticism with self-serving blog posts can only delay the inevitable. These are the 4 flaws of Freelancer that need addressing. I've been Dribblondu, and with that, I thank you very much for watching. Bye bye.